I built that company with my bare hands, and my brother destroyed my career in it with a single sentence. Let me tell you something about betrayal. It doesn't always come from strangers or enemies. Sometimes it comes from the person who shared your childhood bedroom, who knew your dreams before you could even articulate them, who promised he'd always have your back. Sometimes betrayal wears a familiar face, and that's what makes it cut so deep you can feel it in your bones years later. My name is Catherine Reed, and I'm 42 years old. For the past 18 years, I've poured every ounce of my intelligence, creativity, and soul into Reed Manufacturing Solutions. Not just worked there, built it. Brick by brick. Contract by contract. Crisis by crisis. My father started the company in 1987, making precision parts for aerospace contractors. When I joined fresh out of business school in 2007, we had 12 employees and were barely breaking even. By last year, we had 230 employees across 3 facilities, and our annual revenue had climbed to $47 million. But here's the thing nobody tells you about family businesses. Your blood means everything and nothing at the same time. If you've ever worked yourself to exhaustion for something you believed in, only to watch someone else take credit, you know exactly how this story begins. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Also, check the description box below. There are more stories like mine there, stories about survival and justice and what happens when you refuse to stay down. My father, Robert Reed, built his company on old-school principles, hard work, integrity, and the belief that family came first. He was a good man, the kind who remembered every employee's birthday and genuinely cared when someone's kid was sick. But he was also traditional in ways that would eventually cost me everything. He had 2 children, me and my younger brother, Dylan. And despite every objective measure of competence, leadership, or business acumen, my father always saw Dylan as his successor. It wasn't malicious. It was just assumed. The way some families assume the eldest son will take over the farm, or the family name will pass through the male line. My father loved me, I know he did. But somewhere deep in his worldview, companies were passed from father to son. That was the natural order of things. I learned to live with that. I told myself it didn't matter who had the title, as long as the company thrived. And besides, Dylan was my brother. We'd figure it out together. God, I was naive. 4 years, I ran operations while holding the title of Senior Vice President. I managed everything: production scheduling, quality control, supplier relationships, employee retention, crisis management. When we lost our biggest client in 2012, I'm the one who worked 70-hour weeks for 3 months to land 2 new contracts that more than made up the revenue. When our facility in Pennsylvania had a catastrophic equipment failure in 2016, I'm the one who negotiated the insurance claim, sourced replacement machinery, and got us back online in record time. Dylan, meanwhile, held the title of Vice President of Business Development. He was good at schmoozing clients over golf and steak dinners. He had an easy charm, the kind of charisma that made people like him instantly. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like his best friend. But when it came to the actual work, the strategic planning, the problem-solving, the late nights and early mornings, he was notably absent. My father saw what he wanted to see. Dylan's charm read as leadership potential. My competence read as, well, just doing my job. Dad's health started declining 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The aggressive kind that doesn't leave much time for goodbyes or second chances. As he got sicker, the question of succession became urgent. The board started asking questions. Clients wanted assurance of continuity. Employees were nervous. I thought, foolishly, desperately, that maybe this was when things would change. That Dad would look at the actual track record and make the logical choice. I'd prepared succession documents, strategic plans for the next 5 years, detailed analyses of every department. I'd done everything but explicitly ask for the role. I should have just asked. Last December, 3 months before he passed, my father called a family meeting. Just the 3 of us, him, me, and Dylan, in the conference room after hours. The winter sun was setting through the windows, casting long shadows across the table where we'd celebrated so many victories. I've made my decision about succession, Dad said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. The cancer had stolen so much from him, including the booming authority he'd once commanded. Dylan, I'm naming you as my successor. You'll take over as director when I'm gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt the air leave my lungs. Dylan's face lit up with surprise and joy. Dad, I thank you. I won't let you down. I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. Finally, I managed to speak. Dad, can we talk about this? I think there are some things we should discuss about. Catherine. He cut me off with a gentleness that somehow made it worse. You're brilliant at what you do. Operations, efficiency, problem-solving, you're the best we've got. But Dylan has the vision and the leadership presence to take Reed Manufacturing into the future. You'll be his right hand. Together, you'll be unstoppable. His right hand. After 18 years of being the backbone of the company, I was being offered the position of assistant to my younger brother who'd spent half those years coasting on my work. I couldn't argue. Not with my dying father who was looking at me with such hope, such certainty that he'd made the right choice. So I smiled and nodded and congratulated Dylan, and I died a little inside. Dad passed away on March 8th. The funeral was beautiful. Hundreds of employees and clients came to pay respects. I delivered the eulogy because I was the one who could speak without breaking down, who could articulate what Reed Manufacturing meant to Dad's legacy. Dylan stood beside me, accepting condolences with that easy charm, already stepping into the role. The official transition happened on April 1st. Dylan became director and CEO. I remained senior vice president of operations. On paper, nothing changed for me. In reality, everything was about to crumble. At first, Dylan made all the right noises. We're a team, Cat, he said, using the nickname only family used. This doesn't change anything between us. I need you now more than ever. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, he was still my brother. We'd grown up together, fought and laughed and survived our parents' difficult divorce when I was 12 and he was 9. Surely blood meant something. Surely he understood what I'd sacrificed, what I'd built. The cracks started showing within weeks. Dylan brought in consultants, expensive ones from New York who talked about disrupting traditional manufacturing paradigms and leveraging synergistic opportunities. They interviewed everyone, analyzed every process, and produced a 200-page report that basically said we should do everything differently. I pushed back, gently at first, then more firmly. These processes work, I explained in meeting after meeting. We've refined them over years. Our efficiency ratings are industry-leading. Our defect rate is below 1%. Why would we overhaul something that's already excellent? Dylan smiled that easy smile. Because good enough isn't great, Cat. Dad built something amazing, but it's time to evolve. Trust me on this. Trust him, as if trust was something that could be demanded rather than earned. The consultants convinced Dylan to implement a new management structure they called Agile Manufacturing Leadership. It meant more meetings, more documentation, more oversight, and somehow less actual decision-making authority for the people who knew what they were doing, including me. I watched in growing frustration as Dylan made changes that created chaos. He brought in new suppliers to reduce costs, ignoring the relationships I'd spent years cultivating. Quality issues started appearing. He implemented a new scheduling system that looked impressive in PowerPoint but created bottlenecks in actual production. Deadlines were missed. Clients started complaining. And through it all, Dylan seemed oblivious to the damage. He was too busy with the consultants, with rebranding initiatives, with planning a big company retreat. The substance of running the business, the actual work, was falling apart. I tried to fix things quietly, working around his decisions where I could, doing damage control with clients and employees. But I was exhausted. For the first time in 18 years, I started wondering if maybe I should just leave. Find somewhere my work would be valued. Start over. But this was my company too. My father's legacy. I couldn't just walk away. Then came the Friday morning that changed everything. Dylan called an executive meeting for 9 a.m. on June 14th. I'd arranged it myself at his request, send out the calendar invites, prepare the agenda, even order the catering because Dylan had mentioned wanting to make a good impression. The topic was listed simply as organizational restructuring. I thought we were going to discuss the consultant's recommendations, maybe argue about which changes made sense and which didn't. I'd prepared a presentation with data showing the negative impacts of his recent decisions. Maybe this was my chance to finally get through to him. I should have known better. The conference room was full when I arrived, all 7 members of the executive team, plus Dylan at the head of the table where our father used to sit. I took my usual seat to his right, the position I'd occupied for years as the de facto second-in-command. Dylan waited until everyone had coffee and settled in. He looked confident, almost excited. He was wearing the Navy suit I'd helped him pick out for Dad's funeral, and something about that detail made my stomach twist. "Thanks for coming, everyone," he started, his voice carrying that practiced warmth. "I know the past few months have been a transition for all of us. We've lost an incredible leader in my father, and we've been working hard to honor his legacy while moving the company forward." I noticed he said my father, not our father. A small thing, but it registered. That's why I've brought in expert consultants to help us see blind spots and optimize our structure. After extensive analysis, we've identified some changes that will position Reed Manufacturing for unprecedented growth. He pulled up a slide, showing a new organizational chart. I scanned it quickly, looking for my position. Senior Vice President of Operations, that was me. But wait, the reporting lines looked different, and my responsibilities seemed reduced. "As you can see," Dylan continued, "we're creating a more distributed leadership model. Catherine, I want to talk specifically about your role." Every eye in the room turned to me. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart was hammering. "You've been the backbone of our operations for years," Dylan said, and for a moment I thought maybe this was going somewhere good. "Your attention to detail and process management are exactly what we need right now. That's why we're restructuring your role to focus specifically on compliance and documentation." I felt the room tilt slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're bringing in a new VP of Operations, Brad Stevens. He's coming from a Fortune 500 manufacturer. He'll handle the strategic operational decisions. You'll transition to Senior Director of Operational Compliance. It's a critical role, making sure we're meeting all regulatory requirements, managing our documentation systems, auditing processes." Senior Director, not Vice President. A demotion in both title and authority, wrapped in corporate speak about how critical and important it was. I stared at my brother, searching his face for some sign that he understood what he was doing. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at his slides, at the other executives, anywhere but at me. "This wasn't discussed with me," I said, keeping my voice level even as fury and humiliation burned through my chest. "I'm the Senior VP of Operations. You can't just restructure my position without consultation." "We're restructuring everyone's roles," Dylan said smoothly. "It's not personal, Kat. It's about putting the right people in the right positions for where we're going. I built our operational systems. I know every aspect of production, scheduling, quality control, supplier management. And you're replacing me with an outside hire." I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice and hated myself for it. The other executives were looking anywhere but at us, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. "Brad brings fresh perspective and Fortune 500 experience," Dylan said. "Your institutional knowledge will be invaluable in a compliance role, where attention to detail is paramount. Compliance and documentation. The work I'd been doing on top of actual operations management. Now that would be my entire job. Paperwork and audits, stripped of any real authority or strategic input. If you've ever been pushed aside after years of loyalty, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. Like everything you'd built, everything you'd sacrificed, meant nothing. If you're feeling that anger with me, leave a comment below. And if you want to see how this plays out, you'll want to check the description box for more stories about people who refuse to accept defeat." "We're restructuring your role," Dylan said, driving the final nail in with careful corporate phrasing. "Pack up your desk by Friday. We need your office for Brad. He starts Monday. Pack up my desk." The office I'd occupied for 12 years, where I'd solved countless crises and built an empire. I had to be out by Friday, so my replacement could move in. The humiliation was complete. In front of the entire executive team, my brother had demoted me, replaced me, and ordered me to clear out. All in the company I'd built with my own hands. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have stood up and told everyone in that room exactly what I thought of this betrayal. Part of me wanted to flip the conference table and watch Dylan's carefully prepared slides scatter across the floor. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a genuine smile. But it was a smile nonetheless, polite and professional and utterly unreadable. "I see," I said quietly. "Thank you for the advance notice." I stood up, gathered my notebook and pen, and walked out of the conference room with my head high. I could feel their eyes on my back, could sense the shocked silence I left behind. But I didn't look back. My office was at the end of the hall, a corner space with windows overlooking the production floor. I'd chosen it specifically so I could see the heart of the operation, stay connected to the real work happening below. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Dylan had betrayed me, not just professionally, but personally. He'd humiliated me in front of our entire leadership team. He'd stripped away everything I'd worked for and handed it to a stranger. And he'd done it without warning, without discussion, without a shred of respect for what I'd contributed. The rage that flooded through me was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was pure and cold and crystallizing. Because underneath the professional betrayal was something even worse. The little brother I'd protected our whole lives had just stabbed me in the back. But here's what Dylan didn't know. Here's what none of them knew, sitting in that conference room feeling awkward about the family drama they just witnessed. I wasn't just the senior VP of operations. I wasn't just the person who'd built our systems and processes and relationships. I was the person who knew everything. Every single secret, every vulnerability, every skeleton in every closet. And I'd been preparing for this possibility since the day Dad named Dylan his successor. See, I'm not just good at operations and logistics. I'm exceptional at planning, at seeing 5 moves ahead, at preparing for contingencies. And somewhere deep down, I'd known this might happen. Not because I'm psychic, but because I'd watched Dylan my whole life. I'd seen his jealousy, his insecurity, his need to prove himself. I'd seen how he diminished my accomplishments in Dad's eyes, how he took credit for my work in subtle ways. So I'd been careful. I'd been thorough. And I'd been strategic. For the past 2 years, as Dad's health declined and Dylan's ascension became inevitable, I'd been documenting everything. Every decision, every conversation, every piece of information that might someday prove useful. Not because I planned to betray anyone, but because I'd learned long ago that preparation is everything. I knew about the side deal Dylan had made with our second largest client, promising terms he had no authority to offer. I knew about the consultant fees that were grossly inflated, $20,000 for a report that a junior analyst could have produced. I knew about the safety violations in our Pennsylvania facility that Dylan had covered up to avoid fines, violations that could shut us down if regulators found out. I knew about the company credit card charges that weren't quite legitimate, dinners with clients who turned out to be Dylan's college friends, a weekend trip to Vegas that was expensed as a business development opportunity. And I knew something else, something bigger, something that would make Monday morning very interesting indeed. 3 weeks ago, Dylan had started discussions about selling Reed Manufacturing to Titan Industrial Group, a massive conglomerate that swallowed family businesses and stripped them for parts. He'd been meeting with their representatives in secret, hiding it from the board, hiding it from me. But I had access to his calendar. I had friends in IT who owed me favors. I had 18 years of relationships throughout the company with people who were loyal to me, not to the new director who'd been in charge for 3 months. I knew about the sale. I knew about the terms. And I knew that it violated our father's will in very specific ways. Dad had been adamant in his final wishes. Reed Manufacturing was to remain independent and family-owned. If it was ever sold, specific conditions had to be met. Unanimous board approval, consideration of employee impacts, and a clause that ensured the Reed family maintained controlling interest. Dylan's secret deal violated every single one of those conditions. Titan was offering a quick buyout that would make Dylan rich and leave everyone else, employees, minority shareholders, the community, to deal with the consequences. If that deal went through, 230 people would lose their jobs within a year. Our facility would be shuttered and production moved to Titan's existing plants. The Reed name would disappear from the industry Dad had devoted his life to. And Dylan was willing to do it. Not because the company was failing, we were profitable and growing, but because he saw an opportunity to cash out, to take his inheritance, and run without the burden of actually running a business. As I sat in my office that Friday afternoon, packing up 18 years of work into boxes, I wasn't crying. I wasn't defeated. I was planning. Dylan wanted to restructure my role. Fine. He wanted me in compliance and documentation. Perfect. Because compliance officers have access to everything. Financial records, legal documents, board meeting minutes, communications. All the sensitive information that most people never see. And documentation specialists know how to preserve evidence, how to build an airtight case, how to ensure nothing can be disputed or denied later. My brother had just given me all the tools I needed to destroy him. I smiled to myself as I packed another box. Monday morning was going to be very interesting indeed. I spent the weekend in a state of focused calm that surprised even me. On Saturday, I drove to my office knowing the building would be nearly empty. Security waved me through. They'd known me for years, trusted me completely. Why wouldn't they? In my new, smaller office, barely more than a glorified closet compared to my old corner space, I began organizing. Not the boxes of personal items I'd moved from my old office, but something far more important. Digital files, carefully compiled over months. Printed documents I'd quietly copied and stored in a locked drawer most people didn't even know existed. USB drives encrypted with passwords only I knew. Evidence. Testimony. Proof. I'd learned something valuable in 18 years of business. People think digital trails can be erased, but they're wrong. Emails live on servers even after deletion. Financial transactions leave footprints. Calendar entries, text messages, expense reports, meeting notes, they all tell stories, and I've become an expert at reading those stories. The Titan Industrial Group deal was Dylan's fatal mistake. Our father's will was explicit and legally binding. The company couldn't be sold without unanimous board approval and adherence to specific conditions designed to protect employees and the family legacy. Dylan had managed to hide the negotiations from most of the board, but he'd been sloppy. Arrogant, really. He'd used his company email for some communications with Titan representatives. He'd charged meals with their executives to the company card. He'd had his assistant schedule meetings and block out time without realizing that I still had access to the shared executive calendar. But more than that, Dylan had trusted people who were more loyal to me than to him. His assistant, Jennifer, had been hired by me 5 years ago. She was competent and professional, but she'd also watched Dylan take credit for my work for years. When I'd casually mentioned over coffee 2 months ago that I was concerned about some decisions being made without proper board oversight, she'd started quietly copying documents for me. Our CFO, Robert Parsons, was old-school loyal to the company, not necessarily to whoever held the director title. When I'd asked him for some historical financial reports for a compliance project, he provided them without question, including recent forecasts and budget allocations that showed suspicious payments to Titan-affiliated consulting firms. I wasn't plotting some dramatic confrontation. I was building a case with the precision I'd applied to every aspect of my work. By Sunday evening, I had everything organized into a presentation that would make my intentions crystal clear. Monday morning, I arrived at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before the official start of the workday. Brad Stevens, my replacement as VP of Operations, was starting today. Dylan would be in early to greet him, to start the handover process, to continue the charade of restructuring that was really just pushing me aside. I'd scheduled an emergency board meeting for 8 a.m. It had been easy. I still had administrative access to the board's scheduling system, something IT hadn't thought to revoke. The meeting invitation went out Sunday night, marked urgent, titled Critical Information Requiring Immediate Board Action. All 7 board members confirmed attendance. They knew me, trusted my judgment. If I said something was urgent, they took it seriously. Dylan hadn't received the invitation. That was intentional. At 7:45, I watched through the window as board members arrived, looking confused but concerned. Jonathan Hartley, who'd worked with my father for 30 years, caught my eye and nodded. Patricia Wong, our outside director with expertise in corporate governance, gave me a questioning look that I answered with a subtle shake of my head. Not yet. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into the boardroom. The presentation was loaded on my laptop, ready to display on the main screen. 7 board members sat around the table waiting. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. What I'm about to show you is disturbing, but I believe it's essential information that you need to see immediately. I pulled up the first slide. It showed an organizational chart, the current structure of Reed Manufacturing's ownership and governance, with dad's will provisions clearly highlighted. As you know, my father's will contain specific provisions regarding the sale of Reed Manufacturing. Those provisions were designed to protect the company's independence, its employees, and its legacy. Heads nodded around the table. They'd all attended the will reading. What you don't know is that Director Dylan Reed has been in negotiations with Titan Industrial Group for the past 4 weeks to sell the company in a transaction that violates every single one of those provisions. The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia Wong leaned forward, her expression sharp. That's a serious accusation, Catherine. It's a documented fact, I replied calmly. I clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of meetings between Dylan and Titan representatives. These are confirmed meetings, verified through expense reports, calendar entries, and email communications. I walked them through it methodically. The initial contact from Titan. The lunch meetings, Dylan had expensed to the company. The consulting agreement with a Titan-affiliated firm that was really a cover for due diligence. The draft term sheet that outlined a sale price and timeline. With each piece of evidence, I watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to concern to anger. The proposed sale, I continued, would net Dylan approximately $22 million personally. Titan would close our facility within 18 months and integrate our client base into their existing operations. 230 employees would lose their jobs. The Reed name would cease to exist. Jonathan Hartley's face had gone red. He can't do this. Roberts will explicitly prevent. He can't, I agreed, which is why he's been hiding it. He never intended to bring this to the board until the deal was essentially finalized, at which point he would have presented it as a fait accompli and counted on pressure and momentum to push it through. I paused, letting that sink in. Then I continued with a piece de resistance. There's more. Over the past 3 months, Dylan has made several decisions that have actively devalued the company, choosing cheaper suppliers that increased defect rates, implementing systems that reduced efficiency, missing deadlines that damaged client relationships. These weren't mistakes. They were strategic choices designed to create problems that would make the board more amenable to a sale. I showed them the data. Our performance metrics from the past 10 years under my operational leadership, steady and strong. Then the sharp decline over the past 3 months since Dylan took control. He's been sabotaging his own company, Patricia said slowly, her legal mind clearly working through the implications. That's breach of fiduciary duty. It is, I confirmed, along with multiple counts of self-dealing, misappropriation of company resources, and violation of the will's provisions. At 8:47 a.m., Dylan walked past the boardroom on his way to greet Brad Stevens. He glanced through the window, saw the emergency meeting in progress, and froze. I watched his face go pale as he registered who was presenting. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw the exact instant he understood. He tried the door. Locked. I'd thought of everything. For the next 90 minutes, I presented every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Financial irregularities, safety violations that had been covered up, inappropriate expenses, the consultant fees that were triple the market rate. Every single thing Dylan had done wrong, categorized and documented with the same precision I'd applied to operations for 18 years. The board was furious. Not at me, at Dylan. At the betrayal, the recklessness, the sheer audacity of trying to sell their company out from under them. What are you proposing? Jonathan finally asked. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I propose that the board immediately remove Dylan Reed as director and CEO, effective today, for cause. I propose that we launch a full investigation into his activities, with the understanding that criminal charges may be appropriate. I propose that we formally reject any and all discussions with Titan Industrial Group and recommit to Reed Manufacturing's independence. And who would run the company? Patricia asked, though I could tell from her expression that she already knew my answer. I've been running it for 18 years, I said simply. I can continue to do so officially. The vote was unanimous. 6 in favor, with Dylan's own board seat temporarily vacant pending the investigation. By 10:30 a.m., I was the new director and CEO of Reed Manufacturing Solutions. Dylan was escorted from the building by security at 11:15. I watched from my old corner office, which I'd moved back into within an hour of the board vote, as he carried a single box to his car. The look on his face was a mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. He tried calling me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Brad Stevens, the new VP of Operations who'd been preparing for his first day, received a very apologetic call from our CFO explaining that the position was no longer available due to unforeseen circumstances. We paid him the generous severance package his contract required. It was worth every penny. By end of business Monday, every employee knew what had happened. Not all the details, those stayed confidential, but the essential truth. Dylan had tried to sell the company and destroy Dad's legacy, and I had stopped him. The relief in people's faces was palpable. These were people I had worked alongside for years, people whose families depended on Reed Manufacturing paychecks, people who'd been quietly terrified about what Dylan's leadership meant for their futures. That night, sitting alone in my office after everyone else had gone home, I let myself feel it all. The vindication, yes. The satisfaction of seeing justice done. But also something darker and more complicated, the grief of destroying my own brother. Because that's what I'd done. I'd systematically dismantled his career, his reputation, his future in the industry. I'd turned our father's company against him. I'd made sure everyone knew what he tried to do. Was it justice, or was it revenge? Maybe both. Maybe there wasn't really a difference when betrayal cut that deep. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Dylan's missed calls. Part of me wanted to call him back, to explain, to justify what I'd done. But what would I say? That he'd left me no choice? That he brought this on himself? Both were true. Neither made it feel any less like I just destroyed what was left of my family. If you've ever had to choose between family and justice, between loyalty and survival, you understand the weight of that choice. There's no version of a story where everyone wins. Comment below if you've ever been in an impossible situation where every option felt wrong. And check the description box. There are more stories there about the complicated reality of doing what's right when it costs you everything. The first few months as director and CEO were a blur of damage control and rebuilding. The company Dylan had nearly destroyed required careful surgery to repair. I brought in new suppliers to replace the inferior ones he'd chosen, rebuilt relationships with clients he'd alienated, and implemented a transparent communication strategy with employees who needed reassurance that their jobs were secure. The board investigation into Dylan's activities concluded after 6 weeks. The findings were even worse than I'd initially documented. He'd siphoned almost $200,000 through fraudulent expense claims and kickback arrangements with vendors. The safety violations at our Pennsylvania facility were severe enough that if they'd come to light during a regulatory audit, we could have faced criminal charges. The family lawyer advised me that we had grounds for criminal prosecution. Dylan had committed fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly embezzlement. The district attorney's office was interested in pursuing charges. I said no. That decision surprised everyone, including myself. After everything he'd done, after the betrayal and humiliation, I had every right to throw the book at him. But sitting in my office, looking at the prosecution documents, I couldn't do it. He was still my brother. Beneath the anger and the hurt, beneath the justice I'd rightfully claimed, there was still the memory of the kid who'd cried on my shoulder when our parents divorced. The teenager I'd helped with college applications. The best man at my wedding before it fell apart. Family is complicated in ways that revenge can never fully address. Instead, I had our lawyers draft a settlement. Dylan would repay every penny he'd misappropriated with interest. He would resign from all positions and sell his minority shares in the company back to me at a significant discount. He would sign a non-compete agreement preventing him from working in our industry for 5 years. And he would do it all quietly, without making noise that might damage Reed Manufacturing's reputation further. He signed. He didn't have much choice. The alternative was prison. The day the settlement was finalized, Dylan called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Why, was all he said. I knew what he was asking. Why had I stopped short of complete destruction? Why had I chosen mercy when he hadn't? Because I'm not you, I answered. Because someone has to be better than their worst impulses. There was a long silence on the line. Then, I'm sorry, Kat. For what it's worth, I am genuinely sorry. I know, I said. And I did. Dylan wasn't evil. He was weak, insecure, desperate to prove himself worthy of a legacy he'd never earned. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. I'll pay you back. All of it. It'll take time, but I will. I know, I said again. Because if there was one thing I understood about my brother, it was that underneath the failure and betrayal, there was still a core of the person our father had loved. We haven't spoken since. Maybe someday we will, but the wound is too fresh, the damage too deep. He moved to Colorado, took a middle management job with a small manufacturing company outside our industry. He's rebuilding his life, quietly, away from the shadow of everything that happened. I rebuilt Reed Manufacturing. Within a year, we'd recovered fully from the chaos Dylan created. Revenue growth returned. Client confidence was restored. Employee retention hit record highs. We won an industry award for operational excellence, the same award I'd been nominated for 3 times while Dylan took credit for my work. This time, my name was on the plaque. I hired a new VP of operations, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chen who brought fresh ideas without the ego that had poisoned Dylan's leadership. I promoted Jennifer, Dylan's former assistant, to a director-level position. I made sure everyone who'd been loyal, who'd helped me when it mattered, was recognized and rewarded. And I revised the company bylaws to prevent what had happened to me from happening to anyone else. Performance-based promotion criteria, transparent succession planning, protection against nepotism. If I ever have children, they'll have to earn their place in this company, just like anyone else. The revenge I'd planned so carefully was complete. I'd reclaimed everything that was rightfully mine, exposed corruption, saved 230 jobs, and preserved my father's legacy. By every objective measure, I'd won. So why did victory feel so complicated? Late at night, when the office was empty and I was alone with spreadsheets and strategic plans, I sometimes wondered if there had been another way. Could I have confronted Dylan earlier, before things escalated? Could I have been more direct with Dad about my qualifications, my ambitions, instead of assuming he'd eventually see what I'd contributed? Could I have saved my brother from himself if I'd tried harder? The answer is probably no. Dylan made his choices. He chose to betray me, to betray our father's legacy, to prioritize his ego and greed over everything else. I responded to his actions, not the other way around. But knowing that doesn't erase the weight of destroying my last family connection. My parents were divorced and distant. I had no other siblings. With Dad gone and Dylan exiled, I was essentially alone. The company I'd fought so hard to save had become my entire world, my family, my identity. Was that a victory, or a different kind of loss? I'm 44 now. 2 years have passed since that Monday morning when everything changed. Reed Manufacturing is thriving. We just opened a 4th facility, and our revenue broke $60 million last year. I was featured in Manufacturing Today magazine as one of the industry's top female executives. Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed, has been validated. But I still think about Dylan sometimes. I wonder if he thinks about me, about what we lost. I wonder if our father would be proud of how I saved his company, or devastated that I destroyed his son's career to do it. Last month, I got a letter. Handwritten, postmarked from Colorado. Inside was a check for $50,000, the first installment of Dylan's repayment, and a note that said simply, "Thank you for not destroying me completely. I'm trying to be better. D." I stared at that note for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to maintain the wall of anger and hurt that had protected me for 2 years. But another part, the part that remembered building snow forts with Dylan when we were kids, the part that remembered teaching him to drive, the part that was still, somehow, his sister, felt something soften. I deposited the check, and I wrote back. Not a long letter, nothing dramatic. Just, keep trying. That's all any of us can do. I don't know if we'll ever rebuild our relationship. The damage might be too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. But I left the door open just a crack. Because revenge, for all its satisfaction, is ultimately hollow. It answers injustice with more injustice. It balances the scales but leaves everyone wounded. Real victory isn't about destroying the person who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their betrayal destroy you. I learned that the hard way. I learned that you can fight back, you can reclaim what's yours, You can demand justice and accountability, and you can still choose not to annihilate someone completely. You can be ruthless in protecting yourself while still maintaining your humanity. That's the line I walked. Some days I'm not sure I walked it perfectly. Some days I wonder if I was too harsh or not harsh enough. But I made the choices I could live with, and that's all anyone can do. The company my father built is secure. The employees who depended on it still have their jobs. The legacy of quality and integrity continues. And I finally have the recognition and authority I earned years ago. Dylan is rebuilding his life, slowly, away from the wreckage of his mistakes. Maybe he'll succeed. Maybe he won't. But he has a chance, and that's more than he gave me when he demoted me in front of the entire executive team. I kept grinning that day because I knew something he didn't, that underestimating someone who's been systematically documenting your failures is the most expensive mistake you can make. That loyalty isn't the same as weakness. That the person you betray might just be the person who decides your fate. But I also kept grinning because I knew, even in that moment of humiliation and rage, that I wouldn't let it break me. That I was better than my worst moment, stronger than my greatest hurt. Revenge is easy. Mercy is hard. Building something that lasts requires both justice and grace, accountability and compassion. It requires knowing when to fight and when to forgive, when to burn bridges and when to leave them standing, damaged but reparable. I'm still learning that balance. Maybe I always will be. These days, when I sit in my corner office overlooking the production floor, I don't think about Dylan as much. I think about the 230 people working below, about the products we're making, about the clients we're serving, about the legacy we're continuing. I think about Sarah, my VP of operations, and how she's developing into an even better leader than I was at her age. I think about succession planning, about ensuring Reed Manufacturing thrives long after I'm gone. I think about building, not destroying. But on the days when doubt creeps in, when I wonder if I did the right thing or went too far, I remember that Friday morning. I remember my brother's face as he stripped away everything I'd worked for. I remember the humiliation, the betrayal, the calculated cruelty of doing it publicly. And I remember that I had a choice. I could have accepted the demotion, stayed in my diminished role, watched Dylan destroy our father's company, and sell off everyone's futures. I could have walked away entirely, started over somewhere else, let Reed Manufacturing become another corporate casualty. Or I could fight back. I chose to fight. And yeah, maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was survival. Probably it was all three, tangled together in ways I'll never fully untangle. But it was my choice. After years of working in someone else's shadow, of watching men take credit for my work, of smiling politely while being passed over and pushed aside, I finally chose myself. That's the real victory. Not the title, not the company, not even the satisfaction of watching Dylan face consequences. The victory is knowing that when someone tried to erase everything I'd built, I fought back and won. That I refused to be diminished, dismissed, or destroyed. The victory is still being here, still standing, still building, still grinning. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the right choice looks like revenge, and sometimes revenge looks like justice, and sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. I hope you never have to make the choices I made. But if you do, I hope you remember this. You're stronger than you think. You're worth fighting for. And sometimes keeping that smile on your face, even when everything is falling apart, is the most powerful act of defiance you can offer. Check the description box below for more stories about people who refused to stay down, who fought back against impossible odds, who chose themselves when everyone else chose someone else. Stories about survival and justice, and the complicated reality of winning when winning costs everything. And wherever you are in the world, whatever battle you're facing, know this: you're not alone. We're all out here fighting our own versions of this war. Some of us win. Some of us lose. Most of us do both at different times. The key is to keep fighting. Keep building. Keep choosing yourself. Keep grinning. Because they'll never see it coming. And by the time they realize what you're capable of, it'll be too late. That's the lesson my brother learned. That's the lesson I lived. And now it's yours too.